There we go. All right, we are live. How you guys doing?
All right. Fantastic.
Right on, right on. Well, listen, we're going to give it a couple minutes to let everybody join. And looks like we're up to about 35 right now. So we'll give it a couple minutes and let folks get on and see how it goes. And it's got some thumbs up there. I like that. So while we're waiting, just as people are kind of jumping on, why don't you guys share just what part of the country you're in? Are you working from office? Are you working from home? What's your current reality?
So, go ahead, Rob. You take it. Kick it.
Yeah, sure. So we're in Washington, D.C., in Northwest Washington, D.C., to be specific about it. And we've not been in the office since March. So it's been a pretty big shift, as a lot of us have been working from home or working in some other location of choice, quite frankly, because it matters a lot less now.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. I'm Don Neal. I am in a place called DuPont Circle, which is a neighborhood in Washington, D.C. It's about 10 minutes from where our office used to be. And I've been sitting in this chair for the last 4 months, pretty much, in my living room. So I live here, I work here, I eat here, and I'm pretty comfortable in my little cave here.
Yeah. And I'm Josh Hotzenpiller, and I'm out in San Diego. And so I, too, have the majority of the time been at my house. But I sent all my employees home so I can at least come to the office every now and again and get a break. Don, we were talking about how it's just, you want a little bit of a break in the day where you can, come home. And so this has definitely been a very, very new experience for all of us. So no doubt about that. Well, hey, listen, what are we, just 11:01? Is that all we are? We still got to maybe wait for a couple minutes, 11:02, let folks kind of still get in here. Well, maybe we'll get in and just get started a little bit. So, hey, let's talk a little bit about. In fact, this is a great place to kind of launch up. We've kind of said, hey, I haven't left this chair. Folks are working in different places. I want to start with you, Don, and I want us to talk about kind of how this is affecting us and how things are going. And I really wanted to discuss that in two thoughts. One, COVID. So here we are, and we're going, okay, life changed dramatically, and certainly in the business you're in, it was absolutely insane. And then we also have a big reality right now in our world socially, where there's some really intense social moments going on right now. And all those things are affecting us as people, and they're affecting us as professionals. So Rob, I'd love to just have you Don kick us off a little bit. And then Rob, I want you follow, and then I'll follow, and we'll get into our time.
Thanks, Josh. And it's really, I'm glad I can spend the next hour with you, Rob and Josh, and all of you that are joining. So thanks for joining us on this webinar. A couple of things I'll say about the current state of affairs. So Fireside Media is a agency focused on helping associations bring their live media, their events, their conferences, their engagement mechanisms to life. And so one of the things we've done in the last 4 months, which has been frankly energizing, is figuring out how to adapt and adopt to a remarkably new environment, the virtual environment. And so I think one of the things that all of us are learning is, how do people connect? How do they create communities? How do they engage? How do they learn? How do they navigate through really all of the, not just health-related issues, but there's a political crisis, there's a social crisis, the issue of the racial injustice that's been brought to life, the financial and economic crisis, the institutional crisis. So if you look at it, we've been hit with really 5 different forces that are impacting all of us professionally and personally, and you can't really separate it. So I'd say that I've been channeling my own energy and maybe frustration or anxiety into my work, which is helping, convert from live to virtual. And I think in the process has helped me rewire my own sensibility about what this all means. And like all of us, I'm processing every day, and every day there's a new headline. Right. And I'm just trying to adapt and keep up and try to be a good leader for my team and for our clients and my family.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Don.
So I'm Rob Lee, and I'm a CMO at ASAE, which is American Society of Association Execs. And I guess where I kind of take this answer in response to Josh's question is that, like all of us, this COVID pandemic and this racial epidemic have just had created substantive changes in society. And the reality of it is that both of those elements have destabilized many structures that we've all become, quite familiar with it, and quite frankly, probably taken, for granted in many ways, from the healthcare system to just how the economy typically runs. And that's before you get to the racial injustice piece of it. That's personal for me, and COVID is personal for me as well. But the reality is that all of us have been impacted in some way, shape, or form, whether we agree with how anybody's approaching it or not. We've all suffered in some way, shape, or form. And so, it's life has become, and work has become a lot more personal for me, I would say, since March. As I mentioned earlier, we've been working from home, consistently or remotely since March. And so we're now, I remember we left the office, we talked about, well, it'll be a couple weeks and we'll be back in. And now here we are mid-June, or mid-July rather, and we won't go back until after the holiday in September. And quite frankly, who knows what happens then either. So I think I feel like there's this kind of weight on my shoulders in ways that I've never felt before. From an organizational point of view, I think we've done a really good job, and we've done the job that all of us have had to do, and we've made a quick pivot to virtual. So we rely on face-to-face, and that's just not been there. And who knows when that's going to come back. So we've done everything virtual since then. And it's been a good journey. I'll say that. We've really kind of stepped up, and we're really excited about it. So excited for this conversation.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, man. Yeah, it's funny. I had a guy over to my house last night who had launched a new endeavor in January and put all this money into TIs and launching this new company, and nothing. You can't do anything. Just losing everything. And we said, it's funny. Everybody in crisis, we fight or flight, right? That's just human nature. And then we decide how we fight or flight. So you might fight, but you might fight with anger and aggression or frustration, or you may fight with a problem solve. You might flight with going under, or you might flight by running away, or whatever it might be. And so I think it's not just like you said, guys, it's not just the business constraints. There's an emotional complexity that's affecting us. And I think not only do we have to solve some very, very, very challenging opportunities, that's always a fun way to say it, but we have to attempt to do it with a clear head, where I don't know how you guys feel, and maybe I'll lean in just a little bit more on this personal stuff, and then we'll get into professional. But for me, I have so many people in my life that are so extreme on both sides of every issue. Literally, and you're kind of sitting in the middle going, I just want us to be nice and kind and solve problems and make the world better. And they're like, yeah, but what do you feel about this? What do you feel about that? And maybe I'll even just say for you guys as senior leaders, how are you handling some of the challenges, whether it's, should we go back to the office? Should we wear masks? Does all lives matter? All this kind of stuff. How are you leading through those challenges so that you can solve great problems?
I'll jump in quickly and just say that I think, from my vantage point, what I've done is that, I'm a different person, on July 15th than I was on March 15th. And I feel that in various aspects of my personality and my life, and as it relates to my professional life as well. And so for me, what's happened is that, there's many famous quotes. There's one that, really resonates with me, and that being that, at some point, silence becomes betrayal. And that was from Martin Luther King. And, it's one of those things where, regardless of the issues that we're facing, I'm not suggesting I was silent before, because those that know me know I talk and I've always shared my point of view. But that said, that doesn't mean that all these conversations are easy conversations. I'm not talking about conversations just related to COVID or to racial injustice. I'm talking about all conversations. And one of the fundamental changes for me is that I've just kind of embraced that, to say, no one would have thought that, come July of this year, that we'd have gone through all the changes that we have in the last 5 to 6 months. Right. So who knows what's going to happen in the future. And I just want to make sure that I'm as present as possible and deliver everything that I can in any given moment, which is the only moment I control, is the one that I'm in right now. And so that's my kind of orientation from a personal as well as a professional standpoint.
And I'll just say one thing, and then Don, I'd love to hear from you on that, is what I'm going to take away from what you just said is the power of just being present. And sometimes people need to be heard and not agreed with. And sometimes I think as a senior leader, I'm present enough to hear you and to empathize with what's weighing on you. And I think being present is such a gift as a senior leader to give your team. And I think sometimes we think they want us to agree with them, and we don't know what else to do when we don't agree at times. But I'm going to take away from you, man, just the power of being present will oftentimes be that fix and that need that an emerging leader might need from you as you're going through that. Don, how about you? As you're trying to say, let's say clear head, let's focus, let's not get distracted. We got big problems to solve, but yet there's all these people on different sides of the aisle. How do you manage them?
One thing that strikes me, and I think part of this is my own conversational style tends to be in the form of questions. That's how I engage in conversation. And one of the things I've been doing is asking people about their experiences. And I think one of the tipping points in most relationships is when you understand the lens through which they view the world. I used to teach a course, and the first night of the class, I'd ask my students, what's the lens through which you view the world? And they didn't quite understand it, and it was sort of a weird question, and nobody really ever asked themselves. And then somebody'd say, I view the world through the lens of a Christian. Okay. Or as a single mother, or a Black woman, or a Buddhist, or whatever it would be. And so they're generally really deep once people reveal the lens through which they view the world. And I think when you understand someone's lens, you can begin to have a conversation that meets them where they are. You can also reveal your lens. That's really what, 2 months ago, the country was very, very united. 70% of the country was very aligned around a lot of things, and now we're not.
Right.
I think, because we're not really listening anymore. I think that's sort of, everybody knows that. But we're going to have to get back to some understanding of each other's lens, experience, structures, and then we can start to find common ground, because there's a lot more that unites us than divides us. And so that's a long way of saying that's how I'm engaging with people these days, because I'm like you. I've got friends and colleagues, and you don't know where people are coming from, really. You can't just look at somebody and know that that's their perspective or that's their lens. You gotta get inside their head. So I find that to be a useful way to engage with people, regardless of where they're coming from.
Yeah. I love that, because if we start off with what Rob said of being present, and then we apply the question of, hey, now that I'm here and we're talking, what lens are you viewing this through? And then I think that final vote is just being empathetic. I think you can be empathetic without having to agree. And I think that's important for people to remember. I think a lot of times we feel like, well, I don't agree with you, so now I have to tell you that, and we have to get in a fight over it. And it's like, hey, I have the ability to understand where you're coming from. And so often people are just like, thank you for at least understanding. Most of the times they don't go, and so do you agree with me? It doesn't even go there, because it's just, you've already met the need of being heard. And so I think as senior leaders, and this is a great conversation, because this whole thing's about connecting. And I think whether we're an association and taking that same broad picture of like, is our association present? Are we talking about with our folks of what lens they're viewing the world through and how we can serve, through that, which leads us kind of to our first question we want to talk about, which is content. And I don't know about you guys, but is anybody else just fatigued from the media content, with whatever side you're on? Are you just like, oh my God, I'm emotionally, physically, mentally exhausted from all the content that's being thrown at me? So now the $1 million question as an association and as a leader is, what content can we put out that actually connects to people? And it's not swipe left, get rid of it. Another email from ASAE, another email from 360 Live Media, another email from Juno or my various companies. What from your guys' experience, what is the message? What is the tenor that we need to be putting out right now to connect to people with our content?
I jump in this time. Don, I'll give you the next one to start with. I think, what we've experienced is that, it's really the topical content. And that's an obvious statement, but it's still really relevant and important, because what's happened is that, for everything that we've done from a virtual standpoint, it has to be, not only is it's relevant because it's content that people obviously want, but it's actually related to something they're trying to achieve in that moment. Mm-hmm. And so, and what's happened is that, we haven't had to market nearly as long or as hard as we did prior to. Now, the reality is, just to reveal a little bit, is that we're doing less, so we don't have as many things out there as we once did, because many of those things were face to face. But that said, what we've seen is that there's almost an immediate reaction. When people like it, they just sign up. very quickly. And what they're signing up for are things that are related to the issues that we started this conversation about, and how they are applying that to their organizations, to their businesses, to their members and their stakeholders. What's the most value? So it's the synthesis of that to say, here's how you need to deal with it. Here are ways that you can deal with, COVID, with regards to an operations standpoint, or how you're running your meetings in the future. What are the challenges in doing that? That's the kind of stuff that's really taken off. And so, from my standpoint, being a marketing communications guy at heart, obviously, it's interesting because, it's taken a shorter lift and a smaller lift to get something out into the environment. So there's some things that have been percolating as a consequence of that, which I'd love to explore at some other point, but nonetheless.
What I'd say, Josh, is twofold. One, like most companies, you try to communicate typically to as many people as you can, try to resonate. And I think what we've done in the last 4 months is we've gone small and narrow. So we're very clear in the kind of organizations that we want to work with and the people who run them and the way they think. And there's a certain set of characteristics, ambition, risk tolerance. There's a series of things that we know are characteristics of people that we want to work with. And we're also very clear in what our voice is. I think we're much more focused, tailored, and lasered in on the needs of the people we're trying to reach and speaking with authenticity to them. So we've kind of gone from what I would call sort of a mass macro down to more of a meta micro communication strategy. I write a blog every Monday, and I know exactly who I'm writing to. So I try to write the blog to the 300 or 400 people, it goes to, let's say, 3,000 or 4,000 people, but there's 300 or 400 that I know it's going to have some chance of resonating with, right? And so that's my approach. And I just speak my heart and my mind to that audience, and I don't worry about the majority of the people for whom it's either going to bounce off or don't care, right, or open it. So it's a much more liberating way than trying to appeal to so many people, frankly, that are going to oftentimes are allergic because the content saturation is so intense right now. If you're not speaking their language, then they're not paying attention. You got to get them with the first 10-second trailer to the movie, or they've moved on. Like Quibi, it's like Quibi. Everything's like Quibi. You got 10-minute entertainment now. Nobody you watch a 30-minute episode. You're watching 10-minute episodes. So that's how I feel.
Yeah, it's funny. We've been talking a lot about this in our various companies, and it's for those of folks that are watching and don't know this, you guys know this, but in my former life, I was a pastor of a church. And so that was kind of my original world. And I spent a decade of my life doing that. And I got my theology training in New York. And one of the things when they would teach you to speak is they said you start every sermon off with what's called the fallen condition focus. So every single one of us has something that you just go, ugh. Like, I feel this way. I feel stressed. I feel scared. I feel, of course, in the faith world, a terrible sinner or whatever it is. But it's that fallen thing that you go, this is my human need. And they would always say, identify the human need and then speak to that. And I think one of the most powerful things we can do when we think about communication is, what is the human need that you're choosing to address right now? And start by identifying that. So we're going to do a marketing piece on anxiety on your business falling apart, or fear of the unknown in the future, or I'm overwhelmed as a leader because I've never done this. But I think when we think about communication, if we can start with that old thing they taught me in theology school, which is, what is that human need that is out there in the world that you're going to speak to? I think, and that goes back to everything you both are saying, which is narrow, hit. So does that resonate with you guys? And do you think about that sometimes when you start to, okay, what is that need? What's that emotion? What's that feeling that I'm going to speak and hit to right now?
If you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the third need up the ladder is belonging. So people have a fundamental need for belonging in the community and being a community of people, which they feel a sense of emotional resonance with. So that's a need that we all have, right? And so ASAE is in the business of creating community and convening people around a sense of belonging, around shared interest. And the Juno platform is doing exactly that, trying to aggregate people around. And that's what our company does, try to create experiences that bring people together around their fundamental need for belonging. But the issue is we don't want to belong for the same reasons. We have different reasons for wanting to belong to different communities or book clubs or, frequent flyer programs or whatever the belonging desire is. So to me, that's how I think you have to tap into it. And there's a saying, if you want to be interesting, be interested.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you can be interested in the person's fundamental need for belonging and why they want to belong, security, peace of mind, professional development, status, stature, there's a lot of reasons we want to belong to something. And I think that's how I would sort of express how you start the conversation, is try to be interested around what do they want to belong to and why.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. I think that's a wonderful, worldview, and I think it's appropriate and effective. And I guess what I would, add to it is that, particularly in these times now, for the last 6 months, and Josh, you mentioned this up front, regardless of where you get your information and news, let's say, it's polarized. There's a point of view, there's opinion, and I think, what's happened, what I feel is happening out there for all of us is that, what institutions, what people do you actually trust? And the experts are at one moment held up, at another time torn down. And depending on, irrespective of your point of view, irrespective of what you believe from a faith standpoint, if you happen to be subscribe to a particular religious doctrine, or politically speaking, whatever it is, there's a lot of noise out there. And so what I start thinking about is that when you think about how our memory is structured, and you go from 3 levels. You go from encoding, starting with encoding, to storage, and then retrieval. Well, that first piece, encoding, that's overwhelmed right now. And what's also happening is a function of it being overwhelmed, there's also a lot more judgment that you have to kind of filter through in order to determine, subconsciously, what am I actually going to pay attention to and actually put away in my longer term memory so that I can retrieve it at some point when it's important to me. And so for me, what that means is that, I start thinking about, well, how do you fill this trust gap? And how do you share and create content in such a fashion? The subject matter is the subject matter, but the presentation of it and how it addresses the needs in the moment, that's a critical piece. And that's why I love what Don was talking about. I think the other perspective that I'd share is that, as it relates to content, there's a different calculus going on right now. And Josh, you mentioned this up front. Where are we? We're all here right now. That's where we are. We're here, and probably for many of us, we're here longer than we're in our offices, right? I know that I am. I'm working much longer at home because it's always right in front of me. And you come back, you go to dinner, you come back, let me just knock out a few more emails or something else.
I gotta say, Rob, as a CEO, I love this.
Yeah. right, of course. Susan, you listen. But I think what that means is that the ability for that content to actually get encoded, to be stored and retrieved, means that the different calculus is, it's not just about navigating content from the standpoint of what I'm interested in personally, or in this case professionally, but it's also, I'm navigating my life out here. And my life is actually creating a different kind of, I see the scales in the background, Josh, in your background. I love that because that's what's happening out there. Content, this is time. This is time that I have to choose to spend, which means that there's other time that I can't spend someplace else, navigating groceries or whatever it might be. So that's something to keep in mind as well. And I think that's kind of, for me, at least kind of the broad filter to say, okay, now we're going to talk about marketing. We're going to talk about, how to present things virtually. What are the opportunities from a virtual standpoint? How do you gamify things? Whatever it might be. That's kind of my entry point. So.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, Don, you sent this over a couple of your articles, and, a few of my team members were like, man, this is a great writer. And so first of all, I wanted to pass that on to you. But I think the point of that is what you're putting out there. Look at all those thumbs up we just got there. Is what we're putting out there making people's lives better? And is it giving or taking? And I think so many of our the content we put out there is all designed for our betterment. So I want to try to get you to do something so that I can get what I want. And I think people are, the integrity of that, and they're seeing through that. And they're going, that's pulling me away versus, hey, I want to add something to your life. And if I'm going to add something to your life, I'm going to add something to your life. And after a while, you're going to go, I really like this individual or organization. I want more of that. Versus I think so much of the content we put out there is I'm going to take your emotion. I'm going to take your fear. I'm going to do all these things. So I think looking at content in the way that adds is so key. Let me move on to our next question real quick. Okay, so physical is not here right now. I live in California. We just locked back down again. We just got the official word that our schools are all remote. So that's been really enjoyable to think about. So as we see it right now, we're going this way, not this way. With people not getting together physically, looking through the lens, Don, of connection, what are people missing because they can't physically be together? And what can we do as leadership organizations to fill that gap in the meantime? So big question, but what are they missing and what can we do to fill that gap in the meantime?
I'll take a first crack at it. So one of the things I think that since we've all been doing this for 4 months, we've all been on a screen staring at other people for 4 months. And I think we've hit a certain point of diminishing return. And so what I would say, Josh, you and I talked about this not too long ago, it's about being vulnerable. And I think because I wrote a blog 2 months ago and I said, why am I so exhausted at 5 o'clock every day?
Yeah.
And my answer was because I'm looking at myself most of the day. I'm looking at Rob, I'm looking at Josh, but I'm also looking at myself because, typically you don't have an audience. So you're just looking at yourself. And I found that to be incredibly exhausting. And I've changed my way of engaging virtually now. And I'm trying to be more vulnerable. I'm trying to listen more. I'm trying to step back. I'm not trying to convince people as I used to. I felt like I had to try harder because I wasn't there to have my energy, sort of come through in a physical way. And I'm trying to do it virtually and it's exhausting and you can't do it. So I think you almost have to step back and apply some, sort of jujitsu here and like let go and be more vulnerable, more open, listen more. And I think that's going to create more engagement.
Yeah.
So I'm not trying to convince anybody of something anymore. I'm just trying to learn, listen. And in so doing, we're going to create a better connection. And if it's a business call, it's going to go in a better direction for both parties because you're not trying as hard.
Right. Well, Don, I want you to know I've probably done one call a week with you, and I've never felt more exhausted after staring at you for 30 minutes. So
it's exhausting.
It's a personal problem, man, because I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Rob, what about you, buddy?
Yeah, where my head goes quickly are two quick concepts. One is this, human-centered design or human-centered approach, and the other part of it is really give people something to feel good about. As Don mentioned, we've been at this for a minute, and I agree. We have reached a plateau. I saw an article the other day talking about, I don't remember the entertainer, but it was somebody that would be well known. And he was talking about how he was tired of being on Zoom all the time and doing virtual cocktail hours and all the kinds of things that we're all doing in order to connect with people. And so part of, for me, what the interpretation was is that, giving people something to feel good about, and as what, where this leads is in this virtual environment, what are some new and interesting things that we can do that engage them differently? Things that are unique to a virtual environment that you couldn't do in a face-to-face environment. Forget about whether it's better or worse. Is it different? Is it challenging? Is it interesting? Does it pull them in? Does it help them feel good? And I think that's where the quote unquote green space is. That's where the opportunity lies. But it's it's an absolutely different perspective. It's not, here's what I'm doing over here in face-to-face, and then I'm going to translate that to virtual. It's, what am I going to do to create the best possible virtual experience I can? Whatever that is, it works really well here, and this will never work over there. That's where my head is right now with regards to helping, kind of creating this transition, because we're going to be forced into it. And the reality is that we have a lot to be excited about. But we also have a lot to be depressed about and upset about. And, we're all seeking some kind of connection in order to feel good too. So.
No, and I think that there is, it's funny. We had our first kind of meltdown. I have 8 and 10-year-old boys, and we had our first meltdown with our 10-year-old, where I think he finally was like, "This ain't going back, is it?" And it's funny when kids wait all year for summer, right? And they just cannot wait to be done with school and do whatever. And now summer is the amount of time they would have spent in summer. We've passed. They'd be going back to school right now, and I think their little emotional, biological clocks are kicking in, going, "Hey, we live in San Diego, so we've been swimming for 4 months. We've been hanging out. Everything's been great. I'm ready to get back into that human connection." And as a 10-year-old, and so I think all of us were like, okay, we're going to get hit pretty hard, but maybe by fall we'll still be able to get some events back and things are going to be okay. And now I think we've all come to the realization that the gig's over. I mean, it's this year's done. And so I think as leaders, you're right. I love what you're saying of like, we have to go different. It's got to be different. And who, like you said, who cares if it's better or worse? We don't know yet. But we've got to continue to stay creative and innovate, which let me lead that to our next question. How are you guys staying creative individually and with your teams during this time? Don, I want to throw that to you because you guys are crushing away on creativity. And if you were going to say something else, please feel free to backtrack and then grab that one.
Well, I was just going to say one thing on that point. So I've known Rob for a long time. And so I can, when I see Rob or I talk to Rob, I've got a place to go back to. The dinner we had at the Catalog for Philanthropy or whatever it would be. So you and I have sort of a relationship. And then, Josh, I've only met with you in person once, but I feel like I've known you for a long time. And so I think you're establishing relationships either built on a past connection and you can take it in a new direction, but you've got a root. And in our case, Josh, we're starting from one meeting we had in my office a long time ago, but we've become, close really through virtual. And I think that's just because we like each other and we've got some mutual goals. And so I think part of the connection over the next, let's call it 6 months, because we're going to be doing this for at least another 6 months, if not for a lot longer than that. I think we're going to have to find ways to establish that personal relationship, because I think there's no business is going to happen. People buy from people they like.
Yeah.
They connect with people who have some similar, connection. And that's what we're all trying to do, is create connection. So what I would say we're doing differently and trying to innovate is find new ways to do what you did in the beginning of this conversation, which is create a personal connection among the three of us, to give the audience a chance to get some sense of who we were as human beings. And then we can start talking about business and how do you apply this. And so we all know that there's going to be a hybrid environment probably forevermore. One of the things that's been revealed, I think, about live events and conferences and trade shows is there's a lot of waste and efficiency and friction. And I think that's all going to be gone, and it's going to be replaced with, I think, virtual. I think there's a lot of things we can do better virtually, but you can't do it all virtually. So I think the future is going to be something way different. And Warren Buffett has a saying, it sounds a little weird to come from Warren Buffett, but he said, you don't know who's swimming naked until the tide goes out. So
I heard that.
And so I just love, it's kind of weird if Warren Buffett would say that, but, as an investor, but take Brooks Brothers, for example. They were in business for 200 years, and in 4 months, now they're bankrupt.
Unreal.
How does that happen? How can you be in business for 200 years and your business is so fragile that you collapse in 4 months? And so I think that's true for a lot of associations. They've been in business for 100 years, and there's a lot of fragility built into the model of, live events being 40, 50%, 60% of the revenue. So I think smart associations are rebuilding their economic model from the ground up, recognizing that virtual and year-round marketplaces and a whole number of things are going to be forevermore the way people do business. So we're trying to help those associations that are thinking like that and not believing that it's going to get back to some normal. It's not going to go back to some normal ever. It's going to be better. It's just going to be better.
That's exactly it. I mean, I'm very new in the association space, but one thing I hear over and over and over again is the stress of the top-heavy business model, where we are all banking on this one or two big events. And then I remember the first client I ever had, we had gotten everything set up. It was in the association world. We got everything set up, and there was a big strike at the hotel in Chicago, and everybody refused to work. And they couldn't even think straight because they were going to, not, and you're going, man, this entire business model is so top heavy that, to your point, Don, what an amazing opportunity. We talked earlier about fight or flight. Don't flight back to the way things were. Fight for a new future, a new revenue model. The truth of the matter is your members like you. They like you, or they wouldn't be here. So give them a new model, give them a new opportunity, provide better solutions. And that's where I think that creativity comes in. I did want to say one thing about connecting too is, when we talk with folks, then I see some questions are coming in, and you can also add them in the Q&A side, or we can look at some of these. And Peter, if you want to throw them in the Q&A, we can look at them too. But we'd always just say, when you're coming to me, don't be weird. Just don't be weird. Real simple, real great rule of thumb. Don't be weird. And I'll be on with clients and their kids will come on in the background. I'm like, hey man, what's up? My name's Josh. And they get real embarrassed at first because their kid walked in the room. Why? Why do we need to be weird about this? We're all working from home. This is real. I'd love to meet your kid. What's your name, dude? Come over here. My name's Josh. And all of a sudden there's a connection. And they're like, man, that guy Josh was on a sales call. My kid walked in, he introduced himself to my kid, asked him what he was doing today. You want to know how you connect to somebody? Connect with their family. It was way more cool that they thought I actually noticed their kid instead of being like, hey, your kid's in the way, get him out of here, like, or make them feel shameful. That's called being weird. Don't be weird. Be a human being, have fun, enjoy life. And it's amazing how good things go to you. So, that kind of goes along with your naked comment because that was weird. So there we go. Let's see. Is there some questions here, Rob? You mentioned some things on our NDPR Zoom meeting, hybrids. Do you want to mention some of that to them? Talk about hybrids. What do you think about hybrids?
Yeah, well, baked into what we were just talking about, and that being that, as Don was saying, and I know, Josh, you and I've had this conversation often, and that being that, face-to-face over here, virtual exclusively, future is virtual, and really it's hybrid. So, one way to look at that is to consider, how do you build the best possible virtual assets that you have, that you can develop, that you can get engagement on? And then you think about how you add that to your face-to-face when it comes back, in whatever form it comes back. And I think that's an important way to look at it, because what ends up happening is that, I think what will happen at least, is that you're in a position of saying, okay, this is a unique experience. So we were talking about this from a member standpoint, from a stakeholder standpoint, from a participant standpoint, as relates to virtual. The other side of that is also the sponsor piece of it. Sponsors also will be looking for different types of opportunities.
Absolutely.
The opportunity for both sponsors and members and organizations is the fact that virtual can be scaled in a way that face-to-face never could be.
Right.
So, different experiences, unique experiences, the scalability is exceptional. The cost management, the expense side of it is, much more stable. So if you consider thinking about creating that kind of an asset that you then translate into a hybrid experience, now you've got something to play with whenever that comes back. So I think that's, for me at least, that's another way that we've been talking about it, thinking about it. And Marjorie, I appreciate the question, because we had this conversation with Marjorie and her group, PR group here in DC a couple of weeks ago. And that's how we're all thinking about it from the association space. Where we are on that continuum, it varies, obviously. But the reality is that all of us are searching for additional, if not new, revenue models. Additional, if not new, revenue streams, and not necessarily just incremental ones. It could be something totally separate. So, sponsored content plays, those kinds of things. We can get into that, but that's some exciting space.
And the thing, I'm going to say one thing about what you said, and then I'll mention another thing. But we're working with a client that's going to use Juno, and we said, okay, how many folks are you expecting? And they said, oh, somewhere between 10 and 20,000. And I laughed and I said, for us, that's no big deal. But you would have never said that at a physical event. You would have never been like, oh, we're thinking somewhere between 10 and 20,000. You're like, no. It's like, we're hoping for 2,500 to 3,000 or whatever the number. It wouldn't be that type of gap of what we're expecting. And to your point, I think with digital, you have the opportunity to actually go, feel pretty confident about 10,000. We think we might be able to scale up to 20. And you're talking about reaching an extra 10,000 people at your conference. You would have never said that in the physical. So it's a really unique opportunity to think about. The other thing I'd say, and I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on this. So I'm not in the association world, but we as a society have been fully trained in SaaS purchases, fully trained. Subscriptions everywhere, from Netflix to YouTube. How many, I can't even tell. There's apps now that literally go to your bank account and show you all the things you're paying a monthly fee for that you didn't even realize you were. And I say that to say, I think the associations should remember that as a society, we are being programmed to understand that monthly SaaS is normal. So what does that mean now in our world? Maybe 2 or 3, 5 years ago, associations were ahead of the game and it didn't work. But, I think it's really something to look. What do you guys think about that? Do you think there's a SaaS opportunity for associations, or do you think there's just no way?
Let me build on that question and go back to what Rob said. If you take the analogy of retail for a second. So a term that's been thrown around in retail for 20 years is called omni-channel. You can't be a brick and mortar store. The reason Brooks Brothers went bankrupt is they never really built a good online presence. Yeah. They never really created a connection and a community outside of the brick and mortar. And Walmart was getting killed by Amazon forever because they couldn't figure out, they were a brick and mortar first platform.
Right.
It's like associations are often live event first platforms. So that's the analogy. And so are you Walmart or are you Amazon? And if you're going to compete in retail, you have to be omni-channel. You have to have brick and mortar. You have to have a live event. You have to have an e-commerce platform year-round. Having an event with a 3-day shopping mall where B2B sellers and buyers can come together is so antiquated.
Right.
That model is changing right before our eyes. You have to have social presence, influencer presence, kiosks, pop-up stores. Think about what omni-channel retailers do. They surround their customers with whatever means of buying, shopping, influence, and purchasing that they need. And I think associations have to do the same thing. I think they have to create a surround sound, live event, hybrid event, online digital learning, Khan Academy, year-round commercial marketplace, and meet the members where they are.
Yeah.
And I think those are the associations that are going to thrive. They're going to break away from the pack. They're going to be the ones that acquire the small, weaker associations that haven't made that pivot. So I'm super excited about that model. And I think smart associations are trying to do that now. And the good news is this has already been done in corporate America. Commercial enterprise has been doing this for 25 years. So it's not a lot of a risk for an association taking the playbook and then applying it to the association business model, because you have the three most important things. You have a brand, trust, and a respected reputation. You've got a database of a lot of members who love you and trust you. And you have delivery platforms. You've got a website and publications and events and now e-commerce platforms and platforms like Juno to do virtual events. So you've got all the assets. I'm super encouraged, and I hope you're one of the, top 10% who are smelling what we're cooking here, because I do think that's the kind of organization you want to work for in the future.
Right. I love that notion of surround sound. I think every single one of us, whether we're business owners or we're association leaders, take that metaphor, that picture, and go, okay, do we have sound on the left, the right, the rear, the front? Are we creating surround sound for our folks to engage with? I love that picture. And I'd almost even, Rob, can you speak to that, just top of mind a little bit of how would somebody go surround sound? What are ways that they can, what are delivery mechanisms? What are some omni-channel? And I know, Don, you rattled off stuff, but I'm just curious, Rob, what you think about that.
Well, Josh, I'll back into this question by starting with something you said earlier, that being you asked us a question about where do you get your creativity from? And, for me, I think all of us are creative. We all have the ability to be creative as we want. It's just a matter of really, I believe it's just a function of how comfortable we are and how we lower the bar to not make it seem like I have to come up with the next iPhone. I just need to come up with something that works. Yeah. And it doesn't even have to be different. It just has to work. And that, continuous kind of iteration is where you get the big idea at some point. But my point in saying that is that where it goes, I'm always, like Don and both of you, as you as well, I look outside the environment and inside of the environment, right? Because, there's some market forces at play. So this is part of the conversation where I say something that everybody may not agree with, so I apologize in advance. But I do think there's some market dynamics happening, that we don't control as relates to virtual experiences. And one of them is that, the fact that the price points, I think, will continue to fall. Why do I think that? I think that from a registration standpoint. I think that because it's already happened in content writ large. We've been through this. I've been responsible for associations now are what started as a print vehicle, which is now a digital brand. And like every other publication in the world, virtually with a few exceptions, New York Times, Guardian, Atlantic, it's hard to sell content, period. The price point is exceptionally low. So what that means is that's where that scale becomes real important. And then that also dovetails into your question about subscriptions, because subscriptions can certainly work, but there's got to be the scale to support it on one level. And then the other piece of if there's scale, then there's also data. And that data, that secondary cell, if you will, from a data standpoint, is also important, because the fact that we're having this conversation here, and let's say if there are sponsors that are participating in these types of conversations, well, what are you going to do? Well, look, here are the people that are interested in the subject matter that relate to your product, to your industry.
Right.
What do you want to do with that? So I think those are some new opportunities, if you will. If you think about it from a channel standpoint, which is answering your question, I think that it's what we've experienced is that the channels have actually become a little bit more narrow, because of the immediate response that we get when we're pushing something out to the environment. So I'm thinking about channels from a market standpoint, right? So marketing channels, whether it's, email or social platforms, whatever the case may be. So there's been some simplicity that's been revealed, as I mentioned earlier. So that's one aspect of it. But, I think I'll make one other comment. Outside the environment, I'll give you a good example. Zwift and Noom. I don't know if anybody's familiar with Zwift or Noom, but I'll go with Zwift for a moment. I used to race bikes. I still race bikes at a fairly high level. And the point of it is Zwift is an online experience, and you can race your bike. So what happens for those in the cycling community, the Tour de France is typically going on this time of year. Zwift created the Tour de France stages where anybody can go in and ride the Tour de France stages virtually. It's a really cool experience. And that's what I mean by, well, what aspect of that might work in the association space? Because I see it sometimes, honestly, as less about what us in associations need to do, and more about how do we connect with people in ways that are meaningful to them. And if we understand that, then we can understand what our members really need if we're listening. And Don, you mentioned that earlier about being empathetic and actually being able to hear and understand. That's the trick for me. So.
Well, I also want to let you know, next time we're in DC and all this clears, I love road biking and mountain biking. So we need to do some miles around the city. And do you ride the city ever?
I ride outside of the city most of the time.
I want the energy. I want the risk of death, Rob. I don't want to do it.
All right, we can handle that.
We last year, my wife and I were in England, and we stayed with a guy who was probably about 9 miles outside of London, and we got bikes and rode all the way into the city, and it was nuts. And my poor wife, who's not as nearly as excited about that stuff as I am, finally we turned around after 9 miles, and she was like, "Dude, insane." So I'm in for that. So
we got a couple people that want to ride with us, so that's cool. We'll definitely make that happen.
There we go. I like it. We're in. Don, you cycling all, Don?
Yeah, I got a brand new carbon fiber bike, and I ride on the C&O Canal. If anybody lives around DC, it's a 180-mile trail from DC up to Cumberland, Maryland. So that's my jam. So I ride almost every night. Rob, you and I we ought to get out there together. I couldn't keep up with you, but you can be a pace car. I'll try to keep up with you.
That's all good, my friend. We'll have a great time with it.
Look at all this. Me too. Got my new bike too.
Yeah.
Hey, so tell me this doesn't work. Look at this. I mean, I want to say this as we got about 10 minutes left or so. I'm going to throw something out there because I want to challenge us to challenge others. So for those of you that don't know, I'm going to do kind of a shameless plug for Juno, but I want to do a shameless plug for what I think people are capable of. In mid-March, I reached out. CrowdHub is my company who built Juno. And I said to our CTO, Tyler, we need to provide a current solution in this world, in this space, this virtual hybrid, live and learning. And man, we can't do that. There's already so much out there. Anyway, in just over 100 days, built Juno, put it together. We've signed our first 3 contracts. Don and you and I are going to be doing some fun stuff together. I think people often forget how much they can do and solve if they just quiet the noise and focus on solving big issues. We've talked about connecting. We've talked about a lot of things. Let me ask you this question. How are you staying disciplined to solve problems during this time? So talk to me as a senior leader. Let me pull up a chair. What are you doing to be successful and focused during this time?
I'll jump in on that. I tell these stories which help kind of frame my worldview. So here's the quick story. It does relate to bike racing, and this is not a humble brag, I promise you, but it will make the point. So just bear with me, everybody. I know, right now, not at all. So here's the thing. So bike racing. So VO2 max, doesn't matter that you know what it means. What it means is that, for me at least, that I'm in the 95th percentile for people my age. That's fantastic, right? Feel good about that. 95th percentile. Way. I never win a bike race. Yeah. I've won less than 5 bike races in 20 years of bike racing. Why is that? Because everybody else that I'm racing against are in the 96th and the 97th.
That's right.
And higher. Okay. So what that does to my worldview with regards to how do I refine my thinking, as it relates to my work, is that I see it as being that competitive. There are all of us that are in the space are doing an exceptional job because we're already here. I don't think that there are these huge things out there that have been uncovered, because if they have been, then we'd all be doing it anyway. Every year when I'm racing my bike and every year when I'm trying to improve, I'm looking not for percentage points. I'm looking for, 0.5% here, another 0.5% there, because that's going to add up. And if I can get a 1.5% improvement over any given year, that's the difference between 20th and 10th, or the difference between 10th and 1st. And that's how I approach, what we are, how I approach my that's the worldview that I adopt with regards to everything from a business standpoint. So that I make it kind of like this game in that respect. So as a consequence, where does that lead you, right? Well, that's where the focus comes in. There's a lot of stuff that all of us do. How often do we actually ask ourselves the question, should I keep doing that? Josh, do you still need that report? Don, we've been having this conversation and you've been asking these questions. Do I need to answer a different question for you? We never ask ourselves that. There's a whole lot of stuff that we could just discard. And that could be, I'm not talking about people, obviously. I'm talking about resources, ways of thinking that are tying up our resources from focusing on the things that we need to focus in on the future. And someone asked that question in the chat around how do we make this transition? Well, part of that transition from face-to-face to virtual is making sure that we're getting rid of things that we no longer need to do. And it's really the intellectual time as much of anything. So let's make sure that we've, siphoned off the things that just didn't work well. That's okay. Not everything is spectacular. Now we've got additional energy to apply to new challenges and new opportunities that we don't know the answers. Here's the fun part, I think, and then nobody else knows them either. So let's just figure it out.
Yeah. It's funny, Don, I want to hear you answer that, but it's funny, I wonder how many things in our world right now we hate doing and people hate that we do it. Like, do you still need that report? You're like, well, I've hated that damn report for the last 2 years. But nobody said, do you still want me to do that? Because I don't like it. And is it really providing the value to you that you need? And you're like, man, what a great thing to go, let's just look at those. Should we be doing this? How can we get better gains? Even small gains or huge gains when they're the right gains. So that's a big thing. Don.
So I'm going to make this a very specific answer because I do think the question is, with all of the things that we could be dealing with right now, how do we decide what to deal with and how to solve it? So here's the specific answer. And not everybody on this webinar works for an association, but it'll apply if you're a corporate guy as well or woman. I think this is an existential moment for associations. I think if you look at the business model, there's been a lot of furloughs. Associations are tapping into reserves. They're strapped for cash because their virtual events are producing 10% of the revenue the live events once did. Membership's under pressure. A lot of associations have suspended membership dues at the moment. So this is an amazing inflection point. And there's another quote that I love: nothing chastens the mind like the sound of the gallows. And so nothing chastens the mind like the sound of the gallows. So I think this is a moment when associations are stepping back 4 months into this, and the people who were swimming naked because the tides rolled out are like, wait a minute, we got to get through this year and go into 21 with a strong balance sheet. So what we do is we focus on something called the 6 R's. It's a set of metrics that we think every association cares about. Reach, you ought to jot these down. Reach, retention, relevance, reputation, revenue, and ROI. Are we reaching the broadest swath of the audience? I think you brought up the point, why not reach 3 or 4 times the amount of people that we used to with our virtual events than with the live event? Because there's very little barrier to entry. Are we retaining our core members around things that really matter? Are we doing things that they care about?
Right.
Are we building our reputation? Are we generating revenue and ROI? So I think this is an opportunity for renaissance, for associations to reinvent how they think about themselves. And now's the time. Not October, not November, right now.
Yep.
So 15th is the time to think about this. And I think the way you do this is you focus on the most significant issue, which is being relevant to your constituents. If you're relevant to your members and delivering value that's up to the minute and fresh and new and iterative, because every day is a new day in a way that, what does it mean all of a sudden that Walmart's requiring masks of anybody that walks in a Walmart? So if you're the National Retail Federation, or if you work in an industry where anything to do with Walmart is a factor, how do your members react to things like that? So I think it's so exciting because you have an ability to talk to them because they trust you. And I'd say use that trust right now, focus on the 6 R's and laser in on what you can do as individual, forget your CEO or forget anybody else. What can you individually do to impact, this moment in time?
Yeah.
So, let me jump in on something Don said, and that is, from as it relates to associations and what this looks like. And Don's right. I mean, there are a lot. We all face these challenges. For those that are ASA members or even in the association space, we last week, actually 2 weeks ago, we made our annual meeting free this year. Why did we do it? We did it because of the stress that Don was talking about in the community, and the response was overwhelmingly positive. And it wasn't just, of course, it was great, I don't have to pay and I can attend, but it was much deeper than that. And that to me is what makes associations really different and unique, because what we were hearing, consistently, whether it was individual messages or through social platforms, what have you, was simply thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for understanding where we are right now. And it's hard enough to figure out how we're going to move our organizations forward before we get to, well, what do I want to do from a PD standpoint? Can I afford to do that? Does it even make sense for me to ask if I need to ask? How does that even feel from an internal standpoint? I know we're dealing with resource challenges. So yeah, that's a very clear distinction in associations. I think, to what I'd ask to answer and what I'd share with regards to perspective on your question, to be very specific about it, is I do think it's important for all of us to have certain structures in place, thought structures in place. So an example would be product management. Right. So understanding product life cycles and applying them so that we can quickly, to the early part of the conversation, filter through things that work and filter through things that don't work on the measure of business value and member value, and maybe just value system writ large. Those are three different ways, and all of those don't always align, and that's okay, but we need to look at them separately and then make an assessment and then move on. I think having that structure in place, is really, really important, because that accelerates the thinking. Regardless of the area that you're trying to address. And I think that's, simply put, it's like pilot training. My oldest son is a pilot. I mean, he's actually an engineer, but he's also a pilot. And he asked him once about, how do you prepare for emergencies? And he says, well, there shouldn't be any because you should be prepared. And it was just an interesting response. So that's kind of what I see with regards to the ability to make sure that some of those thought infrastructures are in place so we actually can accelerate our thinking.
Yeah.
I'd say two things, Josh, real quick.
Please.
First of all, how can Rob have a son old enough to be a pilot and engineer? Because he looks like he's
That's what happens when you're in the 95th percentile, brother.
Man.
Okay, here we go. I knew I should have said that.
Let me just say one thing. My hat's off to ASAE for offering their annual meeting for free. 80% of virtual events are being offered at no charge. 80%.
Wow.
Now let me tell you guys, you can't have your second virtual event be free.
Right.
Third or your fourth or your fifth. You've got to monetize your virtual platforms. And I think year one, out of the gate, offering it free, give people a free trial. If you've been to Costco, sampling is the way to get people to buy your product. So I think giving it away is super smart, and it's great for the community, Rob. So high five, way to go. But I think what people are looking at now, how do I make my next virtual event generate revenue? How do I get sponsors and underwriters and industry partners to subsidize and help us monetize? Because all of you are going to have to make your next virtual event profitable. And the reason virtual events haven't taken off is they used to be not very good and they didn't make any money.
Yeah.
And we have to, and we're getting better. Juno is a good example of a platform that helps you deliver a better virtual experience with gamification and polling and hearts that are floating around and all this cool stuff. So you got to get that right. And then you have to figure out making money. So I would encourage all of you to really think about what you're going to do to, make that second event profitable.
Three perspectives real quickly based on what Don said, with regards to making money. We talked about the market, depressing prices, virtual, absolutely going to happen, already is, to Don's point. So that's why scale is important. The data piece that we talked about earlier is critical from a sponsor standpoint, and the ability to, share that data moving forward. And also the ability to create sponsored content plays in the structure of the virtual experience. That's where the revenue streams will be. That's what I think, at least. And it's funny, we look at the chat here, we're demonstrating some of this now through the Juno platform, where we're having a conversation and we're also responding to some of the questions. I love that. You couldn't do that in a face-to-face if we're all sitting on a screen someplace, or on a stage somewhere. So,
what's fun? I love that, the hearts and the thumbs up and everything. When you speak on a stage, you can look out and see if people are tracking with you. right? But normally when we're talking, we're like, I don't know if all these people are tracking with us or not. Are they feeling it? And I love that there's just these fun ways that I know I've seen a couple of times you guys say something, the hearts go, and you're like, oh man, I landed one. Like, it feels good.
I guess I have to keep doing that, right? No.
Yeah, it's you, right? Every time you say something, I'm doing it.
Right.
Hey, listen, you guys, we're out of time. You've been amazing. You guys are both great friends of mine. I've so enjoyed sharing life with you guys and just friendship conversation and challenging conversation. You both mean a lot to me. I'm such a huge fan of both of you. If you don't, hey, look at the cat. See what we're talking about, right? Right on cue. Right on cue. If you don't know anything about 360 Live, check them out. I think they're in the chat. They're doing incredible work. Rob is an incredible thinker and friend. And listen, you guys got to experience our first Juno show. So it worked. Thank God. So, we appreciate you guys. We'll see you soon, I'm sure. Be well, be blessed, and we'll see you around. So thanks, everybody, for hanging out. That was awesome. We appreciate you.
Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate it. Take care.
All right.
Be safe out there.
See ya.
Bye-bye.